Hey folks, Kevin here. Well, it's October 21st, 2019. I'm out in the northern edge of the first food forest, and I've tried recording this video multiple times, but each time I just get so darn long-winded, it's frustrating, and I'll probably do that again this time. What I want to share with you today is my experiences, starting with my initial research and observations, and then decision to plant walnut trees into the first food forest here. And recently I've just made a decision to move all of those walnut trees out of this first food forest. This last week or so I've been transplanting lots of plants, and I want to share with you my recent observations and my concerns. So years ago when I started this first food forest, it was a significant slope to it, but undulating area that I had cleared years ago and brush hogged like once a year. Then we let it grow up for 10 years while Thea and I were away. Then when we came back, started brush hogging again and gradually starting doing some more clearing. And we decided we really wanted to go all out with basically a permaculture demonstration site, a really large food forest in this part of the property. And so the substrate, it's all coarse, bony gravel, stone walls in here, which I'd moved out and all. And we came in and we sort of flattened things out with a significant slope. And then I brought in, our township had a huge pile, much larger than any of the buildings you see around here, of wood chips that they've been collecting since 2003. So there are lots of them were really decomposing. I went in and said, geez, I want to take that pile, and they said, sure. I came in every day for months and got as many piles as I could and spread them out. So I had, in some places, 2 feet deep, many places 6 inches to 12 inches deep around this first food forest area. And then we started planting our apples and pears and peaches and plums and pluots and apriplumes and almonds and English walnuts and you know, all of the different ribes, all the various berry bushes and rows of raspberries. Got our solar panels installed where we wanted them, put in a couple more swales and pond systems in here. And this particular food forest area here was somewhat like a back to Eden, where we had a really significant amount of wood chips put in here, and you'd never know it 5 years after that any wood chips were there at all, because it was all turned to grass around all of the trees, which isn't exactly what I wanted. I wanted to get more and more wood chips as time came on, because I wanted to create the succession from a gravel, weedy, grassy area to a fungally dominated food forest soil structure and all. And so we've been working at it bit by bit as time has gone on. We had lots of deer browse problems, rabbit problems as well. So we have the wildlife coming through the area, and so we learned lots of valuable lessons. And my English walnuts, and then ultimately a few years ago I put in some black walnuts right in the food forest amongst the apples, the peaches, the plums, the cherries, all of these different trees around here. And I monitored the relation or the interaction within the integration of all of these different trees. And to be honest, until 1 year ago, I hadn't noticed any negative effect from having any of the walnuts here, be it the black walnuts or the English walnuts. The black walnuts and the English walnut trees were doing very, very well. However, the last couple of years, we've had big bee kill-offs at the end of about this time, October, November of the year. And if you watch our videos last spring and this spring, I said, I don't think we're going to have much of produce, much fruit from all of our trees. They all came into flower, but because we had so few bees around, mason bees and honeybees, we had so few of them, I didn't anticipate we'd have much of a fruit yield. And we did have pretty darn good fruit yield throughout the whole property. However, this year, the apple that was closest, it had a black walnut on one side of it, 2 English walnuts within, all of them, 2 English walnuts and 1 black walnut within 15 feet of the apple tree. And that apple tree last year and this year had fewer apples on it and almost no apples, only maybe about 50 apples on that tree right there, that it had before always had a few hundred apples on it. And one other tree we didn't have as many apples, and that was right next to one of the black walnuts as well. So that wasn't going to make me make a change. Now, it's important for, I guess, for me to start with saying this as well. During my medical veterinary training, one of the things I learned was to have a healthy dose of skepticism when I'm reading a peer-reviewed journal article or a textbook, a medical or veterinary textbooks that would be saying this is the way it is, a peer-reviewed literature saying these are the best things for this sort of care with this disease process in patients. And then you go back and you see, well, they cited this article, and then you find that article, who did they cite? And you go back and back and back, further and further back. And sometimes it was just an erroneous correlation that somebody drew that everybody for many years has been assuming that it was fact. And I always have approached everything that I've looked up, unless I could find some good peer-reviewed literature that supports that through scientific analysis that shows that there's an actual causation. So in other words, walnuts produce juglone, and which is a known cytotoxic chemical that's secreted in the roots. It's concentrated in the leaves, it's in the bark, it's in the new green stems, and it's in the hull or the husk of black walnuts. And many English walnuts are are grafted onto black walnut rootstock. And so as a result of having this healthy dose of skepticism and observing over the years, I've had the English walnuts and black walnuts not have any problems that I could say that would be it. Now, there's also great scientific literature looking at using the same cytotoxic chemical in rats and using it as a treatment for intestinal forms of cancer. So under the appropriate conditions, when a rat has cancer in the digestive system, giving them this juglone ends up causing apoptosis, which is pre-programmed cell death. So you'd want, if you had cancer cells that don't listen to the rest of your body and saying, geez, you're aberrant, you're not paying attention to the regulation of the cells around the body, you're creating a tumor, it'd be great to have that cell do apoptosis. In other words, program itself to die because it's not listening to the environment. Well, in rodents, they found that this chemical can actually trigger this apoptosis, trigger those cancer cells to die. So it is a form of chemotherapy. And with my medical training, I realized that most chemotherapeutic agents aren't targeted agents. They actually cause some non-targeted, there's collateral damage to other cells that are healthy as well. So that gave me a healthy dose of respect for this juglone, but I still thought that by changing the soil type here with a soil succession going from a weedy pioneer species for weeds and grass in new soil that's being developed, and adding wood chips to the area and bringing compost in around those using cardboard and paper products, we'd have a gradual transition in the microbial communities in the soil to being more fungally dominated, which you would find in the woods or in a forest areas that would be more supportive and nurturing for the integration of all of the different species in the property. I hope I'm trying to consolidate my wordiness to make sense. So for years, everything really worked very, very well here. And I should mention that juglone has been known for centuries. The Greeks and the Romans talked about the black walnut and how other trees wouldn't grow near it. And my observations were, geez, that wasn't always true, because I would see places where there are English walnuts and black walnuts, where peaches and plum trees would be right near them as well. And it made me somewhat skeptical and thinking that, well, maybe we didn't have the ideal microbial community. And it's sort of like not having a good diet and you're more prone to becoming ill as a result. You're the first one to catch the cold. You're the first one to have a upset digestive system. And that was my working theory and what I wanted to observe with the integration of the walnuts on site here. So another bit of information historically, I can't remember which culture it was, but there's historical evidence of one culture taking the hulls of black walnuts and casting them into the water for an easy way of catching fish. So it would have some effect on fish that they could catch those fish more easily. And there's good literature talking about a Pseudomonas species that dominate some of the microbial community in around black walnuts, which doesn't promote the microbiome of the peaches, the plums, the apples, and all the other trees. That particular species isn't evident in those other areas. So we have all of this information, and I'm still trying to sort it all out. But recently, one of the things a video that I posted, I went ahead and was gathering black walnuts and hauling them. And I have a screen process. I beat up the hulls with my big, a paddle that's in an electric drill, and I beat the hulls or the husks off of the shells of the black walnuts themselves. And there's a biochemical reaction that changes color from yellow to black when we're exposed to oxygen versus an anaerobic environment. And that lets you know that that juglone is actually converted because of the hydrolysis that actually happens. And when I was saturating the ground with the garden hose, washing off the shells of the black walnuts, one of the things I could see was the earthworms all coming to the surface. Now that's not unusual because earthworms will come to the surface when the ground is completely saturated. They're trying to get so that they can breathe. They breathe through their skin. And so I gathered up all of those earthworms that were there when I was doing the hauling, and I set them off to the side in a safe place that earthworms should do fine. And when I checked on them later, every single one of those earthworms were dead. And they seemed to have some neurologic impingement when I gathered them. So I went ahead and did an experiment off to the side, and where there weren't any black walnut hulls, and I saturated the ground really well. The earthworms came up to the surface. I gathered them up. It was much more difficult to gather those earthworms that weren't around the hull. They would try to pull back down into the earth, even though it was saturated just as much as the area where I hulled the black walnuts. Sorry this is so long, but I wanted to be thorough. And those earthworms that I moved over to another area disappeared and moved on, so they didn't die. But all those earthworms that were in a concentrated flow of water that had this cytotoxic chemical released from the hulls, the juglone, that seemed to be so cytotoxic. And I don't know if this went through the respiratory system or went through their digestive system, but I thought about the microbes that are in the soil. How much did that affect the soil as well? Now, I haven't done any work with that yet, but that's something I want to look at in the future. But that made me decide to move those walnuts, because once the hulls, in years to come, there'll be many seeds coming down from those walnut trees, whether they're English walnuts or black walnuts. And I wanted them to drop in an area that I wouldn't have to worry about getting out and picking them all up, and those hulls could break down. And I didn't want it to have a detrimental effect on the microbial community and the earthworms as well. And I don't know what other macro organisms, those that you don't need a microscope to see in the soil, how much it would affect those. And there's many beneficial macroscopic organisms in the soil as well. So those were all of the processes that I was trying to decide, should I continue with the English walnuts in this area here and black walnuts, or should I move them out? And I'll mention one other thing. The tree right there, an apple tree that had always produced tremendous numbers of apples. Well, this year and last year, much fewer apples, and that was within close proximity to the black walnuts and English walnuts. And so I ended up moving several of the black walnuts and the English walnuts up into an area near where we do the composting, and near where where all of the new beds that I'm putting in. And I'll make a video about that as well. And so what did I plant in the place here? Well, I did put an apple tree right on top of, and I created a mound with fresh compost and chipped it. There's an apple tree right over where an English walnut was, so we'll see how that does. I've got some new seedling persimmons in the two tree tubes here. I got pawpaws, which are tolerant of the Juglone. And in different areas around here, I've planted peaches and plums and apples in the various areas which were near where the black walnuts were taken out of. So we'll see how those plants do. So in theory, there still is some of the cytotoxic chemical that's left in the root systems, because I didn't get all of the roots out. Some of these trees were pretty darn good sized trees. I used Bumblebee to move it, so I'll show some video footage of me moving some of the trees. The tap roots on every single one of these walnuts were intact, and they were all bifurcated. But the lateral roots off to the side, just below the surface, really intact, good structure. So we'll see how well those trees that I just transplanted end up doing, and I'll take you up to that spot in just a minute. But I created mounds with fresh compost so that they're above the area. There's honey locusts right around, so they're going to be doing some of their nitrogen fixing in the area as well. We have the various companion plants around them as well. So hopefully all of these trees that I put into sites where the walnuts were will end up doing well. Another question that people often ask me when they come here, even the tree services that I've had on site, they'll say, "You don't want black walnuts, do you?" And I'd say, no problem. Bring as much wood chips and leaves and the seeds from walnuts, black walnuts, as you want. Within a few months, it's been my experience that there is no detrimental effect to using those in your food forest at all. And I know that people say that just the opposite of that, and I haven't had one bit of negative effect from using the wood chips and stump grindings from black walnut trees or the seeds. I actually, for years, would go into town with my dump trailer and collect all the leaves, and I never minded getting any of the walnut leaves and the seeds and hulls in the bags. I'd put them right around some of the trees, and it had negligible effect. I could not see any detrimental effect to any of the fruit trees, including apples, which are susceptible to the Juglone. So, and again, they were being put on the surface of the soil as a mulch layer, not necessarily being integrated into the soil. So those could break down and decompose, and I don't know if it had a negative effect, but it was not detectable in the trees themselves. So I'll take you up to the area where we transplanted some of those trees. So I'm up here near the second food forest. Pond 2 is right over there. Pond 1's way up here. The composting area is right over to my right, left side of the screen. You may be able to see a little bit of the horseradish and some new beds that I'm creating where we grew the sweet potatoes and potatoes, and for years the garlic over there. I'll be making a video about that soon. But right behind me, you'll see some of the white tree tubes behind me, and you'll see some trees in between those white tree tubes. That's where the walnuts are. I'm standing in the roadway. So the roadway goes right down here, going up to Pond 1 and out to our little side road. And so this is the main drive to get back and forth. And over on that side is the area where we do the composting. We have the horseradish. And then we have the third food forest area that's being developed. So we got plums and peaches and apples all along in there. Off close to the road are all the pecans and the blue spruces, the crab apples, the catapla. I'm just trying to think of all the different nuts that are over there, heart nuts as well. So this is the area where I decided to move the black walnuts and English walnuts to. So what I did do, this whole area, the stuff that looks like black soil there, that actually was all wood chips 3 years ago. So we brought in tons and tons of wood chips, put it on top of these large hugelkultur pits up here. And I'll make a video about that, but that's all the soil that's left over from the wood chips, which is really saturated and difficult to work with. And the area where the walnuts are planted in those white tree tubes, which hold persimmons, that was all wood chips below it. But because I didn't want the feet of our trees to get wet, as I mentioned in previous videos, I'm creating mounds because the soil, we're building so much soil here, the depth of it in some places, when I dug out some of these trees that were just a couple inches of soil initially after let's say I put a foot deep of wood chips in that first food forest that I described. Well, that turned out to be just a couple of inches of soil initially. But over the years, the soil has developed so much that we've got a good foot of soil. Not to say there aren't rocks in the soil, there are. But that's from all the sheet mulching and all of the feeding of the soil and what the trees and the growth of the plants have been doing over the years. And the same thing right here, the wood chips and the plants that I had in this area that I moved out, it's pretty deep, rich soil there, but it's pretty saturated because we're on top of a hugelkultur pit right in this area. So I decided to bring over compost into the area and just dig a little bit down into the old wood chip area, which was all completely decomposed, for where the taproot of each one of these walnut trees would go. All of the lateral roots would not have any chance of getting saturated at all. They're much closer. They remained aerated, being up on the mounds that we created out of the compost. Now there will be wood chips put on top of that to mulch the whole surface of it, but I wanted to get some trials of the persimmons. So we had some volunteer persimmons that I deeply mulched a couple of years ago, and it took a couple of years for those decomposing fruit that I missed to actually sprout up. So unfortunately I didn't get the hair-like roots that came out from the base of those, so I trimmed those persimmons down quite a bit and hoping for some further root development on them to see if these take. So these are really iffy persimmons in those tree tubes, but I wanted to protect them and get them started in this soil just in case they can take off. Now again, the persimmons are known to be tolerant of the juglone. And I'm going to be planting some carrots in there as well. I'll take some of the Jerusalem artichokes, sunchokes, and planting those over there as well. I'll be putting some calendula flowers over in there as well. I'll be doing some lupine. Most of these are all known to be really tolerant of the cytotoxic chemical produced by the walnut trees. White clover I'm going to try and get established over there as well. So we'll see how all of those plants ultimately do, and we'll talk in one of the new videos coming up about those areas there, those beds, and how close these walnut trees are going to be to those areas. But I wanted to put these ones, as I'm doing a trial, a place where I can keep an eye on them all the time, right next to an access road and an area that I'm working with the compost all the time to see just what's going on with these trees. So there'll be some video showing me with Bumblebee moving some of these walnut trees as well, and hopefully it'll be somewhat entertaining. So if you found this video of value, please give us a thumbs up. Feel free to leave comments and your thoughts and suggestions, all of those things, because as a community we can share this information with each other. I'm trying to share with you my failures as well as my successes, my observations, and the results of the literature review that I'm doing. I just don't take things based on what I read in a specific article. I really want to find as much information, supportive information of whatever that information is, and deal with that. So again, give us a thumbs up if you think this was of value, share it with your friends, and by all means, folks, have a great day. Bye-bye now.